So I'd like to read from some talks from Ajahn Chah, some recorded talks, transcribed talks. This one is called About Being Careful, and it can be found on the internet. About being careful. So this is Ajahn Chah. The Buddha taught to see the body in the body. What does this mean? We are all familiar with the parts of the body such as hair, nails, teeth and skin. So how do we see the body in the body? If we recognize all these things as being impermanent, unsatisfactory and not self, that is what is called seeing the body in the body. Then it isn't necessary to go into detail and meditate on the separate parts. It's like having fruit in a basket. If we have already counted the pieces of fruit, then we know what's there. And when we need to, we can pick up the basket and take it away. And all the pieces come with it. We know the fruits are all there, so we don't have to count it again. Having meditated on the 32 parts of the body and recognized them as something not stable or permanent, we no longer need to weary ourselves separating them like this and meditating in such detail. Just as with the basket of fruit, we don't have to dump all the fruit out and count it again and again. But we do carry the basket along to our destination, walking mindfully and carefully, taking care not to stumble and fall. When we see the body in the body, which means we see the Dhamma in the body, knowing our own and others' bodies as impermanent phenomena, then we don't need detailed explanations. Sitting here, we have mindfulness constantly in control, knowing things as they are. And meditation then becomes quite simple. It's the same if we meditate on the word Buddha. If we understand what Buddha really is, then we don't need to repeat the word Buddha. It means having full knowledge and firm awareness. This is meditation. Having the inner sensitivity that is always aware of right and wrong is called Buddha. It's not necessary to be continually repeating Buddha. You've counted the fruit in your basket. Every time you sit down, you don't have to go to the trouble of spelling out the fruit and counting it again. You can leave it in the basket. But someone with mistaken attachment will keep counting. He'll stop under a tree, spill it out and count, or put it back in the basket. Then he'll walk onto the next stopping place and do it again. But he's just counting the same fruit. This is craving itself. He's afraid that if he doesn't count, there will be some mistake. We are afraid that if we don't keep saying Buddha, we'll be mistaken. How are we mistaken? It's only the person who doesn't know how much fruit there is who needs to count. Once you know, you can take it easy and just leave it in the basket. When you're sitting, you just sit. When you're lying down, you just lie down, because your fruit is all there with you. It's one more paragraph.
Of the same. Yeah, go for it.
We should see all the forms of craving which cause us to have desires. But talking about desire can be confusing. Some people get the idea that any kind of desire, such as desire for food and for material requisites for life, is craving. But we can have this kind of desire in an ordinary and natural way. When you're hungry and desire food, you can take a meal and be done with it. That's quite ordinary. This is the desire that's within boundaries and it doesn't have ill effects. This kind of desire isn't sensuality. If it's sensuality, then it becomes something more than desire. There will be craving for more things to consume, seeking our flavors, seeking enjoyment in ways that bring hardship and trouble, such as drinking liquor and beer. So those are excerpts from that talk. Those are excerpts from the talk about being careful.
Well, you can see, I mean, you could just read that as an inspirational story. Oh yeah, just be mindful and whatnot, which is usually how I would hear people talk about Ajahn Chah. But you could be quite strict about things he's saying. And you could see, so what is in common? What is in common to not constantly counting the parts of your body, not constantly reviewing your body? What is in common to not constantly repeating Buddha, 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 or touching, touching, moving, moving, sitting, sitting, hair, nails, skin? What is in common to that? The common is establishing your mind upon the context, what he refers to as basket. When you know you have this in your basket, you don't need to keep taking it out and reviewing it, which is usually what most people's meditation practice is. Just keep doing it robotically, methodically, and completely losing the sight of the context on account of it. That's what I'm talking about. The peripheral awareness is basically becoming aware of the context, whereby you don't have to keep reminding yourself what you're doing, because you already know what you're doing. And that's exactly what he's saying there. You already have the basket. You don't need to keep stopping and chucking the fruit out to count it again. Unless your mind is overwhelmed by your own doubt, lack of clarity, lack of context, craving, as he said himself. And same when people do the mantra, like, yeah, you can bring to your mind Buddha, Buddha, if that makes you contemplate the quality of the Buddha, the quality of renunciation, the quality of freedom from suffering, and then discern that context, and that's how you practice Buddha. But if you're just going like a parrot to yourself, just Buddha, 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 expecting that verbal repetition to result in some sort of samadhi, well, that's extremely wrong samadhi. And same, if you're expecting experience to arise on account of you just constantly counting your fruit and not developing knowledge of the basket that contains all the fruit, means that's not the samadhi the Buddha was teaching. So people can not look into this and then just sort of, okay, you don't need to look at anything. No, count the fruit first time. Review your body, as in bring in the context of a body that's subjected to sickness, aging, and death, of a body that's not in your control, of a body that is subjected to elements. And if reviewing parts of the body will enable you to discern that context initially, that's fine. That's why the Buddha would have listed those things. But not as a sort of blind, methodical, mechanical repetition practice, whereby you don't take responsibility or discernment of the context. And then exactly, as Ajahn Chah describes, if you do it rightly, if you discern this context peripherally, it's a very simple thing to do then, to practice. You don't need to keep bringing it up. You don't need to be wondering, what do I do next? Because there is no next within the mind established upon the general context, the right context. Then you would exactly know, this is within the context, this is against the context. As in, this is wholesome, this is unwholesome. And that's all you need to know. And that's exactly the last paragraph you mentioned. It's, yeah, people have no sense of context, everything is a problem. Oh, well, that's just craving, isn't it? You wanna sit on a nice chair, that's just craving, everything is craving. It isn't. There is craving that leads to more craving, and there is craving that leads to the end of craving. So you should crave renunciation, you should crave solitude. Yeah, crave for those things because they will result in complete understanding of the nature of craving. You should crave the ability to be able to withstand the elements, the hardship. Not like apply the blanket, oh, that's all craving, failing to see that that's your craving at the time, because of which you don't make any effort towards abandoning the craving, just dismissing it because it's all craving. And that's what Ajahn Chah describes. So those desires are not sensuality. Sensuality is clearly unwholesome, intentional and unwholesome. Yeah, you can keep refining those desires, but the point is to know where the line is. And not just go around mechanically doing your mantras and vipassana techniques and mechanically denying everything. Because everything is craving, everything is impermanent, everything is not myself. That's not true. The Buddha said things are on account of which your sense of self depends, basically. Things that determine you are impermanent. Things that determine you are suffering. That's why you are not your own. He didn't say everything is impermanent, everything is suffering, everything is not self. No, only things that you take to be yourself need to be seen as impermanent. And what are those things? Things rooted in greed, aversion, delusion. So, That's why when people ask me, oh, is there any like teacher that you think, I said, that I would think it was right, that I would agree with, except obviously the Buddha or Jnanavira, I would say most likely Ajahn Chah, but not for some kind of blind devotional reasons, but because, see, you could read these passages and you could see everything we talked about based on the suttas, based on Jnanavira. He's saying it in his own words. And you can't do that if you haven't developed understanding of that meaning, of that context. It wouldn't occur to you to say those things. But it's easy to misread, because his instruction, it's not very it's not accurate. It's not like straight to the point. It's more generic. So if you have a broader context, you can start understanding it rightly. But if you don't, it's going to be much more easier to misunderstand. I mean, even the specific instructions, people will misunderstand if they have the wrong view. But let alone instructions that are not as specific, which is the way he was teaching. Whether maybe it's lost in translation, I don't know. But the point is, it's much more open for misinterpretation, as we've seen firsthand for a number of years. Like people who lived with him, still, when they see what he was teaching, you realize that that's not at all. And you can tell that despite never met Ajahn Chah, but reading that, understanding the suttas, you could see what the broader context is. That to most people remains invisible.
So here's another talk from Ajahn Chah, and this is it's a series of question and answers. This one's called Monastery of Confusion. So please just feel free to stop me.
Okay.
And comment on any points. So Ajahn Chah, are there any doubts about practice you need to resolve now? So the questioner, when the mind isn't thinking much, but is in sort of a dark and dull state, is there something we should do to brighten it, or should we just sit with it? Ajahn Chah, is this all the time, or when you are sitting in meditation? What exactly is this darkness like? Is it lack of wisdom? The questioner, when I sit to meditate, I don't get drowsy, but my mind feels dark, sort of dense or opaque. Ajahn Chah, so you would like to make your mind wise, right? Change your posture and do a lot of walking meditation. That's one thing to do. You can walk for 3 hours at a time until you're really tired. Questioner, I do walking meditation a couple of hours a day, and I usually have a lot of thinking when I do it. But what really concerns me is the dark state when I sit. Should I just try to be aware of it and let go, or is there some means I should use to counter it? Ajahn Chah, I think maybe your postures aren't balanced. When you walk, you have a lot of thinking. So you should do a lot of discursive contemplation. Then the mind can retreat from thinking. It won't stick there, but never mind. For now, increase the time you spend on the walking meditation. Focus on that. Then if your mind is wandering, pull it out and do some contemplation, such as, for example, investigation of the body. Have you ever done that continuously, rather than as an occasional reflection?
So that's the whole point we talked about so many times. If your view of what meditation is, it's mechanical, that's exactly going to be the result. The state of drowsiness or lack of clarity, ambiguity. Mind you, for most people, they confuse that for peace. They think that's a peaceful abiding. But this person who is asking the question clearly understands that it's kind of dark, he's in dark. And that's why Ajahn Chah said, oh, you mean unwise. You want wisdom, you want clarity, you want discernment. What do you do about it? Did he say watch your nostrils, or just be here now, present, holistically? Or did he give him the mantra? No, he said you need to think more. Think more on the particular topics of your occasional reflection. Spend 3 hours back and forth reflecting on the nature of impermanence on your body, upon which your experience as a whole sits on, depends on, and always was and always will be. So your past, your future, your present is equally determined by the random presence of the living body, beating heart in your chest and so on. If you think that, you will be developing the themes you think about. If your theme is theme of dull mental states, that's the theme you will be developing about. And those states are always within sensuality, confusion, and wrong views, which means all your efforts towards meditation, if they don't go towards clarity, they will then automatically be developing, furthering the wrong views. I think Ajahn Chah was quite polite, actually, because it was obvious how misguided those questions were. But he was saying, well, I don't think perhaps maybe your posture or something. No, it's just clearly, it's just, when he sits, there is zero self-awareness. It just goes into a state, which many people do. You see them on a meditation floor, and just nodding left and right, bobbing and weaving. And the Buddha did describe that in the Suttas.
Flawed meditation.
Flawed meditation. Yeah, the Buddha did describe that in the Suttas. Like they call themselves meditators, but what happens? They premeditate, mismeditate, over-meditate, under-meditate, because they end up meditating with sensuality. The dull, not developed faculties, and they're just sort of nodding, shoulders drooping, sleeping. Because again, the only way to counter that, as that person asked, is not through some counter method. It's through that active self-reflection, dwelling on the certain themes. If you dwell on the theme of withdrawal from sensuality, which is fundamentally rooted in the assumption in your thoughts of sensuality, you will then enter the first jhana, accompanied by thinking and pondering. Big surprise. Not by kind of blackness, darkness, dullness, head nodding. No, clarity of mindfulness and thinking and pondering that has transcended sensuality. Why? Because it understood the roots of it. It understood the extent of it. It understood the cessation of it. You dwell on that theme, you can enter it at will. You just have to remember it, which you would.
So I'll continue with these questions. Questioner: I feel frustrated because of my state of mind. I'm not developing samadhi or wisdom.
So for that person, he obviously doesn't know what either samadhi or wisdom is, but he has some inclination, some idea. But most likely for him, samadhi equals the experience of overwhelming peace that you had nothing to do with. You were just sitting and watching your nostrils, and then. But he's not getting that anymore either. Nor is he getting any clarity.
And Ajahn Chah answers him: when you have this condition of mind, the suffering comes about because of not knowing. There is doubt as to why the mind is like this. The important principle in meditation is that whatever occurs, don't be in doubt over it. Doubt only adds to the suffering. If the mind is bright and awake, don't doubt that. It's a condition of mind.
So how would you say differently? Don't doubt that. Don't doubt what's in front of you.
Well, you know it clearly.
Learn to see it on its own terms. Allow it to arise. All those things we talk about. Because you can doubt various, is it this, is it that, but you can't doubt that that thing is in front of you. And that's what many people would still be affecting with their own doubt. So all you need to do is stop habitually giving into the doubt in order to see that doubt is secondary to the arisen phenomenon. The state of mind, for example. And you can't doubt that. So Ajahn Chah is pointing out that you need to learn how to think on those terms, on the terms of the things that have arisen on their own. Because even if you doubt, that attitude of doubt will be secondary to those things. So if the mind is bright and clear, you recognize it. The mind is bright and clear. Then you might be doubting about different things, but still the basis is the basis that's not doubted. If the mind is affected with confusion, ambiguity, darkness, whatever it is, that is the basis. Because for most people, doubt is fueled by the desire to get rid of the state that they don't want. But the desire to get rid of the state you don't want will be there because the state that you want haven't been understood either. So there is no understanding developed in either of the states, wanted states or non-wanted states. So even when they had the peaceful states, they have no understanding of it, which means they don't recognize it arisen on its own terms as a phenomenon. Which means although they're not actively doubting it, as in they're not actively trying to get rid of it, they're still susceptible to doubt because they haven't clarified it, they haven't understood it.
Doubt has arisen.
Even the doubt, exactly, you can recognize it as an arisen phenomenon.
You can't doubt that.
And you can't doubt that. But that would require you to allow these things that arise, that have arisen, to endure on their own. Not just, but that's a hard thing to do when your whole notion of practice and meditation is about doing something. Oh, I do this, I do this, I do this, I do. No, you don't do anything. Oh, I don't do anything, I don't do anything. That becomes your doing. So you need to unwind that attitude, but not to the point of dismissing everything and like nothing is to be done, we are already in Nibbana and whatnot. You recognize it, but then you need to allow it to endure on its own. And keep your craving to do something on account of it in check. And that's how you get to discern thing that's present. Presently arisen states, as the Buddha would describe.
Ajahn Chah continues, if it's dark and dull, your mind, don't doubt about that. Just continue to practice diligently without getting caught up in reactions to that state.
Exactly.
Taking note and being aware of your state of mind, don't have doubts about it. It is just what it is. When you entertain doubts and start grasping at it and giving it meaning, then it's dark.
Yeah. That's exactly what we just said. So even if it's, no matter what the state is, bright or dark, you recognize it on its own, allow it to endure, don't give in to reaction, as he said, towards it, because that's how the darkness and doubt really overwhelms you. But that doesn't mean either just ignore everything and just be at ease with everything. Because in order to allow things to endure on their own, in order to not keep maintaining your reactions towards them, you need to develop discernment of their nature. But you will not develop that discernment if you go completely the other way and mystify the whole thing, whereby just being here and now in pristine awareness and whatnot, holistically present in just the present moment, that's completely the other way now. First is you try to get rid of it, of everything. This one is you try to accept everything. But you should not be in a holistically present moment of your awareness in regard to sensuality. Because if you are, it means you're welcoming it, you're entertaining it, you're bound by it. So you want to practice discernment, but not overdo it, nor underdo it. Hence the middle way. And you recognize that on the states of the mind, whether it's doubt, whether it's like contentment, whether it's sensuality, whether it's ill will, whatever state it is, you recognize it on its own, which means there has to be some effort of discernment and contemplation. But if that effort starts to sort of pick itself up and starts doubting itself, that's where you stop. But you don't develop a view that you should always stop or you should always push forward. And that's why when they ask the Buddha, so how did you cross the shore? Well, by not pushing forward, by not pulling backwards, by not standing still.
So this is from the same talk, Monastery of Confusion, and the questioner continues. And he asks, are vitaka and vichara the same? Ajahn Chah, you're sitting and suddenly the thought of someone pops into your head. That's vitaka, the initial thought. Then you take the idea of the person and start thinking about them in detail. Vitaka is picking it up. Vichara is investigating it. For example, we pick up the idea of death and then we start considering it. I will die. Others will die. Every living being will die. When they die, where will they go? Then stop. Stop and bring it back again. When it gets running like that, stop it again. And then go back to mindfulness of the breath. Sometimes the discursive thought will wander off and not come back, so you have to stop it. Keep at it until the mind is bright and clear.
So keep the discursive thinking until the mind is bright and clear.
Yeah. If you practice vichara with an object that you are suited to, you may experience the hairs of your body standing on end, tears pouring from your eyes, a state of extreme delight, many different things, as joy comes about
From proper thinking.
from proper thinking.
I know that I heard at least a number of people, but I could see that being quite a common attitude. So you would even read that, what he said quite clearly. You learn how to think properly. You pick up, I don't want to say object because it's already, that notion is already infused with the wrong view for many people. But you pick up a theme and then you think about it, you clarify it, you ponder on it, thinking and pondering. So you're not denying it, you're not doing it for the sake of trying to get rid of it. On the contrary, you want to develop the clarity in regard to that which is present, in regard to that which is enduring, which has arisen. And you can't develop clarity if your attitude is of trying to get rid of it. So people will be reading this as clear as it is, so proper vitaka vichara, and still practice their meditation for the purpose of shutting all down, all thoughts. I must stop thinking, failing to see that that's another thought, that they are thinking at the time. You can't stop your thinking because even the first jhana is not about stopping the thinking. It's about thinking and pondering away from the basis of lust, aversion and delusion. And then within that you'll know how to stop that thinking. But even that, it's not you stopping it. It's just you discerning mindfulness and imperturbable, theme of imperturbable even higher than the domain of thinking and pondering. But you won't get the idea of what that is until you learn how to think and ponder properly. As the Buddha said, they gave the simile for the jhana, when a mountain cow, before it sets its foot on one stone, thinks about stepping on the second one and then falls in between. So that's when people already have notions of what cessation of thinking and pondering is, while they even haven't understood or learned how to do rightly thinking and pondering in the first place. And that's all we talk about. Learning how to think. Take a theme, dwell on it. Self-questioning that we always do. Ask and then stop. Don't rush in giving the answer, oh, this is this. Because that's almost on the level of psychologizing. Just ask these questions because they will force you to endure the presently arisen situation that you're questioning. But if you provide the answer, that often means, oh, you jumped on it. And now you're going to go for the other answer and you lost the context. You lost the sight of the peripheral. But if you stay with that questioning, you're not doing it for the sake of self-mystification. You want to know, but you don't want to jump at the answer. You allow the question to endure. And that's how questions get answered on their own terms, not on your preconceived terms. And that's vitaka vichara properly.
The questions continue. Questioner. Can this happen with any kind of thinking, the rapture, the joy? Or is it only in a state of tranquility that it happens? Ajahn Chah, it's when the mind is tranquil. It's not ordinary mental proliferation.
Yeah.
You sit with a calm mind and then the initial thought comes. For example, I think...
So that would be, that would be another thing that the person needs to start discerning first. What is a proliferation? What is thinking and pondering mindful? So mindful thinking and pondering, there is no base for proliferation. Absence of that peripheral awareness in regard to thinking and pondering, that's the proliferation. But it's not proliferation means thinking. Thus, no proliferation means no thinking.
Yeah.
You could only wish it's that easy.
So he says, for example, I think of my brother who just passed away. Or I might think of some other relatives. This is when the mind is tranquil. The tranquility isn't something certain, but for the moment the mind is tranquil. After this initial thought comes, then I go into discursive thought. If it's a line of thinking that's skillful and wholesome, it leads to ease of mind and happiness, and there is rapture with its attendant experiences. This rapture came from the initial and discursive thinking that took place in a state of calmness. We don't have to give it names such as first jhana or second jhana and so forth. We just call it tranquility.
Yeah. Imperturbable, unshakable. At the time. So there's nothing mystical about it, that's the whole point. But there's nothing mundane about it either. And even thoughts such as his dead brother will not necessarily disturb that tranquility unless he chose to give into it and lost the context, lost the peripheral awareness of his own thinking, lost the sight of it, lost the theme of it, call it whichever way you want. Then then he's affected by it.
So this is from another talk called Still Flowing Water. Ajahn Chah, I've often taught that tranquility is stillness. Flowing is wisdom. We practice meditation to calm the mind and make it still. Then it can flow. In the beginning we learn what still water is like and what flowing water is like. After practicing for a while, we see how these two support each other. We have to make the mind calm, like still water. Then it flows. Both being still and flowing, this is not easy to contemplate. We can understand that still water doesn't flow. We can understand that flowing water isn't still. But when we practice, we take hold of both of these. The mind of a true practitioner is like still water that flows.
So, two things simultaneously present. Stillness and flowing. If you chase one of them, you're not still. But when there is stillness, or rather when there is flowing, there is stillness. Two separate things. And that's why the true practitioner is the one who discerns that. Discerns stillness while flowing. Allows flowing while still. They're not on the same footing. So it's not a contradiction in terms of A is B and B is A. It's A and more A, or less A and A. So stillness and flowing, it's nothing other than saying what the Buddha said, arising is manifest, or ceasing is manifest, and changing while standing is manifest. Persisting while staying the same is manifest. Flowing while being still is manifest. Is that mystical? It's a third characteristic of, as in the most fundamental characteristic of anything that has a nature of arising, which is literally everything in your experience. But you're not chasing the content of what arises, you recognize that basis of it. So whether things are arising or they're ceasing, either way there is persisting while remaining the same. Increasing, decreasing. Either way, the same thing is persisting while changing. And that's a definition of, like, say, we spoke about it before. I don't want to get too technical about it, because then, well, people will lose the sight of this context in particular when it comes to context of meditation. But it's the same thing. It's not like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In terms of like a linear flow or something. That means you're already in that flow. But you could see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as things flowing, as in coming and going, while the context, while the peripheral context of those things remains unchanged. So what is the most fundamental context of your experience as a whole? It's your current mood. As the Buddha said, as Ajahn Chah said there, like say, currently you're tranquil, and you know that's not necessarily always going to be the case, but that's the case at the time. Within that tranquility, you have thoughts coming and going. So within this, you have this. So within the mood that's enduring, that is not changing as fast, so to speak, that it's there on its own, you have these things coming and going at a quicker rate. But you're not losing the sight of that, so you're not chasing these things coming and going, nor are you mystifying your mood and ignoring things coming and going. You see, with this is. You see, with the basis of this tranquility, I have such and such thoughts. And it's still enduring. And if you're not sure, you ask yourself, oh, is my mood still, am I still tranquil? If the answer is yes, it's still the same thing enduring. It's still the same stillness. So if you start discerning stillness rightly, it will not be affected by the flow. such as the example of him being tranquil, thinking about his dead brother. If he was not established in that tranquility, even if it's not tranquility, if it's any other mood, if he were established properly, it would have been the principle of that development of that imperturbable, as in something steadier than these particular things. So in his stillness, even the flowing thoughts of his dead brother and memories did not overwhelm the mind, did not uproot that establishment of two things simultaneously present together. Greater context and things within the context. That's why I keep using the word context. Because there's no context without a content of the context, but the content of the context is not the context. And that's exactly, the context is still in regard to the flowing content. And it gives the meaning to the flowing content, that stillness. But in order to discern that rightly, you need to see the domain of flow and domain of stillness as two simultaneous things present together, but not the same, not completely apart either. And that's what meant for a true practitioner. That means that's meant for somebody with the right view.
He continues, the mind of a true practitioner is like still water that flows.
Yeah.
A flowing water
Cannot
that's still.
lose the sight of the context, no amount of the flow.
Whatever takes place in the mind of a Dhamma practitioner is like flowing water that is still.
Yeah.
To say that it is only flowing is not correct.
Exactly.
Only still is not correct.
Exactly. That's why I said context is, you can't conceive context without the content of it, but content of it has no meaning without a context. Saying there is stillness without a flow, it's meaningless. Or there is just flow without stillness, it's equally meaningless. Equally wrong.
But when we have experience of practice, our minds will be in this condition of flowing water that is still. This is something we've never seen. When we see flowing water, it is just flowing along. When we see still water, it doesn't flow. But within our minds, it will really be like this, like flowing water that is still. In our Dhamma practice, we have Samadhi, or tranquility, and wisdom mixed together. We have morality, meditation, and wisdom. Then whenever we sit, the mind is still and it flows. Still flowing water. With meditative stability and wisdom, tranquility and insight, it's like this. The Dhamma is like this. If you have reached the Dhamma, then at all times you will have this experience. Being tranquil and having wisdom. Flowing,
or as the
yet
Buddha
still.
said, not suffering amidst suffering.
What is the purpose of tranquility? Why should we have wisdom? They are only for the purpose of freeing ourselves from suffering, nothing else. At present we are suffering, living with dukkha, not understanding dukkha, and therefore holding on to it. But if the mind is as I've been speaking about, then there will be many kinds of knowledge. One will know suffering, know the cause of suffering, know the cessation of suffering, know the way of practice to reach the end of that suffering. These are the noble truths. They will appear of themselves when there is still flowing water.
When the principle of simultaneous dependence has been understood, one who sees Paticcasamuppada sees the Dhamma, as the Buddha said himself. One who sees the Dhamma sees Paticcasamuppada. With this is. With stillness, flowing is. When there is flow, there is stillness in regard to it. It's just which way you're going to go. Whether you'll be taken with the grain of that flow, or you will be discerning against the grain of the flow, against the flow.
So this again is from the talk, Still Flowing Water, Ajahn Chah. Some people think that meditation means to sit in some special way. But in actual fact, standing, sitting, walking, and reclining are all vehicles for meditation practice. You can practice at all times. Samadhi literally means the firmly established mind. To develop Samadhi, you don't have to go bottling up the mind.
It means establishment of the mind upon the context. That is imperturbable in regard to sitting, walking, laying down or standing. So what is the context of the four postures? Is the presently enduring body as a whole. Not in a specific posture. Specific posture is secondary to the present body. So if you're mindful of the body properly, if you're discerning the theme of the present body on account of reflection, body parts, whatever you take on, you will be then mindful of all the postures within it. Means the mind is established peripherally in regard to what's presently actually manifesting in front of you. Standing, walking, talking, sitting, extending your arm, eating, all these things.
You can't lose your mindfulness.
Exactly.
On account
Because your mindfulness is not in the content.
Yeah.
It's in regard to the context of the content, the meaning behind it. But if you don't make the effort to discern that theme, that context, you are going with the flow, even when you're doing the meditation practice at the best of your efforts.
He continues. Some people try to get peaceful by sitting quietly and having nothing disturb them at all. But that's just like being dead. The practice of Samadhi is for developing wisdom and understanding. Samadhi is the firm mind, the one-pointed mind. On which point is it fixed? It's fixed on the point of balance. That's its point. But people practice meditation to try silence their minds. They say, I try to sit in meditation, but my mind won't be still for a minute. One instant it flies off one place, the next instant it flies off somewhere else. How can I make it stop still? You don't have to make it stop. That's not the point.
Exactly. Yeah, why would you? The
We're-
mind is never still. The mind thinks, the eyes see, the nose smells, and so on. But it's you being affected by the moving mind. That's the problem. But you don't see that that's the problem. You don't see that it's your attitude in regard to your own mind the problem. So you blame the mind for it. So you try to stop your thinking. You try to control your environment where nothing will disturb you, because you will not be able to remain still in regard to the flowing of your thought. So you try to deny the thought, try to suppress it, try to silence it. And even worse, develop views that that's what jhana is and whatnot.
He continues, you don't have to make it stop. That's not the point. Where there is movement is where understanding can arise. People complain. It runs off and I pull it back again. Then it goes off again and I pull it back once more. So they just sit there, pulling back and
Pulling
forth
it back,
like this. You must contemplate in order to find peace. What people usually refer to as peace is simply the calming of the mind, not the calming of the defilements. The defilements are simply being temporarily subdued.
Yeah, through ignoring them, through denying them. So I wouldn't call it even a temporary peace. Or I suppose you could call it, but it's not a peace.
Yeah.
Because by denying thoughts, by trying to not think, by shutting everything out, you will not even see what the problem is. So what it amounts to is ignoring the problem means there is no problem.
Yeah. He says, just like grass covered by a rock. In 3 or 4 days you take the rock off, the grass in no long time, it grows up again.
Because you haven't uprooted anything.
The grass hasn't really died. It was simply being suppressed. It's the same when sitting in meditation. The mind is calmed, but the defilements are not really calmed. Therefore, Samadhi is not a sure thing. To find real peace, you must develop wisdom. Samadhi is one kind of peace, like the rock covering the grass. In a few days you take the rock away and the grass grows up again. This is only a temporary peace. The peace of wisdom is like putting the rock down and not lifting it up, just leaving it where it is. The grass cannot possibly grow again. This is real peace, the calming of defilements, the sure peace which results from wisdom.
And wisdom is not a metaphysical experience or some sort of transcendental release at the end of your meditation technique. Wisdom is effort to understand brought to fulfillment. Understanding. Understanding the nature of the arisen thing, understanding where the problem is, understanding the origin of the problem, the cessation of the problem, and the way out of the problem.
So the talk continues. In any case, in our practice, no matter what aspect you refer to, You must always begin from the mind. Do you know what this mind is? What is the mind like? What is it? Where is it? Nobody knows. All we know is that we want to go over here and over there. We want this and we want that. We feel good or we feel bad. But the mind itself seems impossible to know. What is the mind? The mind doesn't have form. That which receives impressions, both good and bad, we call mind. It's like the owner of a house. The owner stays put at home while visitors come to see him. He's the one who receives the visitors, who receives sense impressions. But what is it that perceives? Who lets go of sense impressions? That is what we call mind. But people can't see it. They think themselves around in circles. What is the mind? What is the brain? Don't confuse the issue like this. What is it that receives impressions? Some impressions it likes and some it doesn't like. Who is that? Is there one who likes and dislikes? Sure there is, but you can't see it. That is what we call mind. Therefore, it is said to begin the practice by calming the mind. Put awareness into the mind. If the mind is aware, it will be at peace.
Or as the Suttas say, by discerning the sign of the mind. Discerning the signs and characteristics and properties of the mind. A necessary precondition for arising of the right view. So how can you develop the right view? How can you know the way out of suffering? If you don't even see your mind as a thing that's there, which is there, but you don't see it. And how can you see it if you never make the effort to see it? If all of your efforts are focused on the content of your mind, dwelling on the content, shutting the content down, being engaged fully with the content, you never step back to look at the context. What's peripheral in regard to this content? And if you never do that, you can never see what the mind is. And then there is absolutely no basis for understanding, no basis for the right view. And it's literally, just going around in the circles.
So if the mind is aware, it will be at peace. Some people don't go for awareness. They just want to have peace, a kind of blanking out.
Yeah.
So they never learn anything. If we don't have this one who knows, what is there to base our practice on?
And see, even that one who knows, I heard many times get mystified.
Yeah.
The one who knows. Yeah, but do you know the one who knows? Or are you just mystifying your experience by ascribing it to the one who knows? Call it whatever you want. You must know it. That's why Sotapadhi is knowing that you know, not just the one who knows that I took on trust or whatever mystified experience I had. Yeah, the one who knows, sure, call it that way. Do you know him? Do you fully understand him? Do you see his origin? Do you see its cessation? Do you see the way out of it? No. You just go around saying he's just this, he's just being here like this, the one who knows, the pure awareness. What does that even mean? You haven't understood any of it. It's all just literally like a blanket. Just use it, keep repeating this to cover everything up.
Yeah.
Because when there is no problem to be seen, there is no problem.
A kind of blanking out, as
Yeah.
you said. He continues, in order to calm the mind and become aware of the perceiver of sense impressions, we must observe it, follow the one who knows, train the mind until it's pure. How pure should you make it? If it's really pure, the mind should be above both good and evil, above even purity. It's finished.
Make it as pure as necessary for not being able to suffer. That's it. When you can't suffer, when you're not liable to possibility of suffering, you don't have to make it anymore pure. Because that will be pure.
So that's when the practice is finished.
Yeah.
So what people call sitting in meditation is merely a temporary kind of peace. But even in such a peace, there are experiences. If an experience arises, there must be someone who knows it, who looks into it, investigates and examines it. If the mind is simply blank, then that's not so useful. You may see some people who look very restrained and think they are, but the real peace is not simply the peaceful mind. It's not the peace which says, may I be happy and never experience any suffering. With this kind of peace, eventually even the attainment of happiness becomes unsatisfying. Suffering results. Only when you can make your mind beyond both happiness and suffering will you find true peace. That's the true peace. This is the subject most people never study. They never really see this one.
Because they never made the effort to see it. They never made the effort of questioning your own views, questioning what you think peace is, whether that really is peace. What the meditation that you find helpful, well, do I have a reference what truly helpful things are? Do I know that, or I just go by what makes me feel good? Yeah, you have to start somehow. It's not going to be perfect, but if you never make the effort to understand it, you're just going to be following further down the line of the same imperfection, building on top of it. So by questioning your own views, you will be able to see which ones are less wrong, which ones are less likely to be wrong. And then by questioning those further, you get to discern them further. And that's how you abandon the wrong views. Not by shutting them out, but by fully penetrating them. They get undone. So like all those questions that this person is asking, you could see, you can't ask a question that's not already rooted in some sort of a view. So you recognize, what's my general situation? Am I free from suffering or not? No. Means I don't have the right view. Means all my questions that come are not right. So all I can do is not make them as wrong. And you make them really, really wrong when you take them for granted at face value as right questions. When you don't question your questions. So he was asking, how do I develop peace? As if he already knows what peace is. But if you were to know what peace is, what tranquility is, you would be peace and tranquil. You would have the right view. So the question is good in a sense of, well, he's at least aiming at some sort of tranquility, but it's not good because he's not seeing that his idea of peace and tranquility cannot be the right one, because if it were the right one, he wouldn't be asking the question in the first place.
So he would ask, what is peace?
Well, he would, exactly, yeah.
That
That
would
would be
better.
even more accurate. You recognize, I have a notion of peace, but I'm a Putujana, which means that notion cannot be right. So instead of denying that, out of conceit or whatever, he admits it. And because of that, he can ask, what is peace? Ask somebody who he thinks he knows. In this case, it was Ajahn Chah. And if people start thinking like that, then the contradiction that your own thoughts are carrying in your day life, day practice, will become more and more apparent. And you won't be able to entertain them. You will undo them. But if you don't even question this, then you would be having saying things like, the one who knows, the knower, and completely mystify it, without any understanding of the nature of that. And then just use this mystical kind of buzzword terminology to sort of glorify the present moment. Yeah, be in the present moment. But that's not enough. You need to understand the nature of it. And if you start understanding, then you realize, as I said many times, being in the present moment is not an optional thing. You're always in the present moment. When you think about your past, you think it presently. When you plan your future, you think it presently. So neither past nor future are the problem. Oh, I must stop thinking about it. Don't plan the future, don't think about the past. Why not? Those are just thoughts. So you're blaming your thoughts for your suffering? You're blaming your past for your suffering, or your future, which hasn't yet occurred? Which means your suffering then cannot be undone by you if it were truly in your past, because it's done. If it were truly in your future, because it cannot be done. But it isn't it? It's in your attitude in regard to your own thoughts. But if you just take things for granted, like knowing you're a Putujana, but then don't question even your own way of questioning, just assume that you already know things rightly, that's a contradiction in terms that you are not obviously aware of. So you develop stillness amidst the flow by discerning the context that remains immovable while its content is changing. One of the fundamental contexts is this body present here, your own body. It's a basis of any other content of your experience. And if you don't lose the sight of that context, necessary basis, a determination for any experience you have means you will not be overwhelmed or affected by any experience you have on account of your body. And what experience you have on account of your body? All experience you have on account of your body. That's why the Buddha would say, oh, he develops mindfulness of the body necessary to the extent necessary for final knowledge. He developed the context of a necessary basis for other things that are simultaneously present on top of that basis, to the extent necessary for the mind to be completely free from ignorance and liability to suffering. And necessary basis is what sankhara is. So he fully relinquished sankharas. Extinguishing of sankharas means extinguishing the suffering. Extinguishing of the ownership, of the confusion, of the ignorance of the necessary basis. Doesn't remove the necessary basis structurally, the body is still there, but removes any affection that can arise on account of it. That's why for an arahant what's left is this body here and all the name and form externally. So no amount of change in the name and form, change in the elements, no amount of flow will disturb the fully developed, transcended pretty much, extinguished ownership of that fundamental context. Because if your experience is rooted necessarily in the presence of the body here, that is its necessary basis, your ownership is redundant, it's secondary. You are not its creator. You are not its manager either. You can only assume you are the owner, you are your own, because things are given to you beforehand on their own. But you recognize that the experience is there because the body, liable to experience, is simultaneously there. There is no room for the sense of self there to be that owner and creator of the experience. And that's how you disown it, not by denying the experience or denying the sense of self, but by simply realizing that it's impossible to own it, because even your ownership is on the necessary basis of this random body living here, being present now with the beating heart and breathing lungs, that you have no say in. If those things you have no say in change, no amount of your say can make a difference. So you realize, my own say is not my own fundamentally. But you can't realize that accidentally, because it's completely against the entire grain of your experience. Everything is going with that say, with that intention upon intention. So you need to keep making that effort to discern that context behind, and you discern it to the extent necessary, then you have fully uprooted any dependence, any liability to the content of that very context. Context of impermanence, context of suffering.